Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Midnight, Mark Tipton.
Oh, thank you. As always, I want to thank you for the monitor as always, and I hope everyone understands this one is a little bit more somber tone on the edition of the podcast, and the nickname Midnight in this case is because today we want to discuss the unfortunate passing of the great, beautiful Bobby Eaton.
Yeah, I mean, this one's going to be a tough one. You know, Bobby, for those of you who don't know, Bobby and I were a tag team for 2 years as Midnight Gold. And, I was telling the story earlier that, Bobby Eaton was one of my favorite wrestlers growing up. I so much, in fact, that the first move that I ever attempted when I got in a professional wrestling ring was the Alabama Jam.
Oh.
And it felt like my entire asshole came out of my body. It hurt so bad. But, so that was the first move I ever tried. And then a lot of my wrestling, even now today, is taken from Bobby. The swinging neck breaker, the way I take a post, just random stuff that he did. That Bobby was as smooth a worker as you could possibly be. You understand? And when people talk about the greatest in-ring performers of all time, the guys that knew him and the guys that worked with him, they all put him at the top. You know what I mean? And that's pretty high company considering all the people that he used to run with, right? We're talking about Rock and Roll Express, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, endless guys that were just amazing. And they say Bobby was by far the best, inside the ropes. So all that kind of stuff, and that was before I even, met him. I was a huge fan of Bobby Eaton. And then you meet him, and he turns out to be the nicest guy in professional wrestling. And it turned out to be he was actually the nicest man I'd ever knew because he genuinely cared about everyone equally. He didn't care if you were a wrestler or a referee or if you took tickets or he swept the floors. He treated you with respect, and he was genuinely cared about your well-being. The last time I talked to him, actually, his wife, Donna, who's Bill Dundee's daughter, she passed away in June. And I called to talk to him to see how he was doing. Brief conversation because one of the kids had just got there after hearing the news. But I talked to him for a few minutes, and I kept trying to ask him how he was doing, and all he wanted to talk about was how my family was doing. Like, how was the shows going, stuff like that. It's like, even in that darkest time, he was still trying to, ask me about my life, which mine was insignificant, should have been insignificant to him at that point, but it wasn't, and that's just the kind of man that he was.
All right. I do appreciate you saying that. I mean, and as you were talking, I noticed something you said there, something we've talked about recently, about the proper attitude for wrestlers to have, the kind of attitude of gratitude for everybody involved in making it work. And here you have an ideal example of someone who exemplified that in every way, and all his interactions with everyone around, and particularly with someone who had such a direct interaction with your career, and I know that's important to you. And I do hope that everyone understands. I suppose because he was known mostly as a tag team wrestler, he was a team guy, a team player. I suppose is a good way to put it. People may not have a total appreciation for the scope of his career, and I think you're an ideal person to help discuss that and just kind of memorialize that on this podcast. If you'd like, maybe we kind of go through his career, and you could talk about some of the highlights and the stops along his career, and let people know about the things he did and the impact he had on professional wrestling. And really, the first place I came into contact with him was, here watching Memphis wrestling every Saturday morning, where I saw him there and was introduced to him. He was a part of the first family professional wrestling, managed by Jimmy Hart, and I knew him there. And if you could, maybe I guess that's a good place as any to start.
So, if we can start just a little bit earlier,
Oh,
actually.
by all means,
so,
please.
Bobby would go to shows when he was a kid and a teenager, and he would help set up the ring. And if he helped set up the ring, then he got to work out in the ring, right? He wasn't trained. There really wasn't training schools back then, or really you weren't trained. There were some people that showed you some stuff, but Bobby was just a natural, you know what I mean? And he started wrestling, I think, when he was like 16, 17 years old, you know, and it just progressed from there. I mean, this was the late 70s when he started, obviously, and by the time he got to Memphis, he was pretty polished, you know what I mean? And that says a lot about him, too, because, I mean, he had only been in the business maybe 4 or 5 years, maybe, at the most, and here he was already being considered one of the best in-ring guys, especially in Memphis. Memphis wasn't known as, you know, a technical wrestling territory. You know, it was a lot of brawls and fighting and
Personal feuds
and over-the-top gimmicks and things like that. But like, you know, Dundee and Bobby and maybe Tony Charles when he came through, but other than that, you know, who was actually workers, you know what I mean? So, and like I said, you know, one of the biggest knocks on Bobby was always that, well, he couldn't talk. Well, that's not true, because if you watch those early days in Memphis and he's cutting promos, he's just as good as cutting promos as anyone else on the show, just about. You know what I mean? Like, and the reason, and he told me this himself, he said, you know, when you've got Cornette and you've got Stan Lane, why would I need to talk? You know what I mean? And that was kind of his, and Dennis too. He's talking about Dennis as well. You know, he's like, with those, you know, if we split it up 3 ways, it would be weird. You know what I mean? But just let them talk and have their moment. And that was the way he was. He didn't have to. You know.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a kind of humility in what you're describing there. Certainly he could do, but if you have someone else, whether it's Jim Cornette or Jimmy Hart or whoever else you have there, someone who excels at that, and I see his point. If you tried to go with too many voices, the message could get diluted and kind of lose the attention of the audience. And there's someone who has in mind the ultimate goal is to entertain the audience, based on what you said. But I did like you mentioned about him putting up the ring and those sorts of things. That also calls back to something, because basically what he did was he demonstrated his interest and his willingness and humility again to kind of work his way up and try to find a way in, because this is something that meant so much to him, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's kind of the same thing. Like I pretty much fell into the business. Like I didn't think there was any way to actually. To me, there was no path to get in professional wrestling when I started, right? It was pretty much know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy. You know what I mean? And that's exactly how it happened. You know, and kind of the same thing with Bobby. Like, how do you, especially in his day, like, how do you break into this? You know what I mean? So he would just go to the promoter, hey, can I put up the ring and blah, blah, blah. And they'd let him put up the ring, and then they'd let him get in the ring, and he could do some stuff. And I think as the story goes, I think they were short one night. And they were like, hey.
And he was ready.
And he was ready. You know what I mean? So, yeah, just Bobby was a natural. And you can't say that enough, but he really was. I mean, like, and I talked to Dreamer about this too. He was like, every time Arn or Tully or anybody was talking about back in the day, they always said Bobby was the best, hands down. You know, and he just had so much respect throughout the wrestling world that it's unprecedented, really, because even the nicest guys in professional wrestling, there's somebody that had a bad dealing with them, and like someone's gonna badmouth them. You know what I mean? It's inevitable, right? I have never heard a negative word about Bobby Eaton in 21 years in the business, my entire life growing up watching wrestling. I've never heard anything but praise for Bobby Eaton.
All right. Well, one of the things that I want to make sure we get to, and I don't want to hold off too long, if there wasn't anything else in particular during this time in Memphis you want to talk about, I really feel like when you say the name Beautiful Bobby Eaton, the next words that roll off the tongue are Midnight Express. Because so much of his career, he was a part of that. He was both with Dennis Condrey and with Sweet Stan Lane. He is identified with that, that tremendous Hall of Fame, however you want to put it, level tag team, a legendary tag team. I suppose that's the best way to put it. Would you like to talk about how he came into that tag team and kind of let everyone know what that tag team meant to the history of professional wrestling?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bill Watts was having trouble in his territory. So he went and paid a visit to Jerry Jarrett to kind of revamp himself or ask advice or whatever it may be, and they kind of had a powwow. And Watts had asked Jerry Jarrett, hey, what do I need to do? What do you think of my best course of action for my business? And Jerry Jarrett said, well, you see that guy over there? And he's pointing to Bill Dundee. He said, you need to hire him as your booker. And like Watts goes, okay. So I don't know if it was immediate or if it happened later that night or whatever it was, but Watts approached Dundee, and Dundee said, yeah, I'll do it, So Dundee took a little group of guys from Memphis to Mid-South. And what Dundee was like, okay, so the Mid-South area started out as a junior heavyweight territory. It was Danny Hodge, it was Leroy McGurk, it was, junior heavyweight thing. When Watts took it over, he made it a heavyweight, right? He made it a heavyweight territory, and it boomed business for that, right? So then it boomed that for a while, but then all of a sudden he hired Dundee, and Dundee brought in more of the smaller guys. And that's where Bobby and Dennis and Rock and Roll Express all came in, and Dundee himself. You know what I mean? Well, Dundee actually didn't work. That's a whole other story. But Dundee did some work, but most of the time he was just a booker. So, and that's the kind of thing that, like, they put him and Dennis together, and Dundee said, well, you guys need a tag name. And Dennis said, well, I was using the Midnight Express in this other territory I was in. We could probably use that. And they were just like, okay, that's fine. Back then, there was no correspondence between the territories. Like, no one would know. Right.
I guess other than if something appeared in a magazine or something like that.
So it was all, we can do whatever we want kind of thing. There was no. So they became the Midnight Express, and that run in Mid-South is widely considered one of the hottest times in professional wrestling history. Not just the Mid-South territory, professional wrestling history. For the numbers they were drawing and the things they were doing. 30, 40,000 people in the Superdome in Louisiana, that's unheard of, right? And, Bobby and Dennis were a huge part of that because they were working on top. They were the main event tag program with rock and roll, and, Bobby, like I said, this is, like, what year is this? 84-ish, somewhere in there. You know what I mean?
But that certainly sounds accurate.
I think it was 84. 84-ish. So, Bobby had been working maybe 7 years right here, and in one of the hottest angles and the hottest territories and working on top. I mean, I just want everyone to really wrap their mind around something like that. You know what I mean? Like, he's maybe 24 years old, 25 years old, and he's legitimately one of the top draws in the business. You know what I mean? As a tag team, yes, but still one of the top draws in the business. It's just people don't get enough. Like I've always said, Bobby doesn't get enough credit. Because like they said, they just see him as a Midnight Express guy or just a tag guy or whatever you want to say. But you have to look at this kind of stuff. Bobby grew up in an era where no one really cared about their quote unquote creative like they do now. Like, oh, I need better creative or, whatever the hell they want to say. Guys just wanted to wrestle and they wanted to make a living and provide for their families. And it was a job that they loved, but it's still a job. So for Bobby, it was just having a career and making money. You know what I mean? So he could think. And he loved professional wrestling. We talked wrestling. He loved Lou Thez. I mean, he loved a bunch of even the newer stuff. He liked some of that stuff going on. So he just loved professional wrestling. But at the same time, he grew up in that era of, would you rather work on top making no money or be on the card and make a living? Does that make sense? And that's kind of been the thought process with territories was if I'm wrestling in a territory and when I'm on top, I make $300 a night, right? But when so-and-so's on top, I make $500 a night. Well, shit, I'm going to want that other guy to be on top. Besides my own personal ego aside, more money means more money.
More practical concerns. Less, I guess, artistic influence in what they're and maybe losing sight of what ultimately is the bottom line, and that is the bottom line.
Exactly.
Well, within that era, and my memory is very hazy on this because I do not remember where along the line Jim Cornette showed up. Because when you say that name, Jim Cornette, because
he came with them from Memphis.
From Memphis, okay.
Yeah.
Because obviously the name, as you mentioned, had existed before with Ravishing Randy Rose. But then I really felt like Bobby and Dennis made the name. And you mentioned the other name, the other team, the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah.
Obviously, who got their start in the Memphis area as well and came along. And one of the things this has reminded me is I want to take an opportunity to go back and find some of those Rock and Roll Express versus Midnight Express matches. I want to.
They're ridiculous. They're just off the charts ridiculous. The fact that the stuff that they were able to do, and and we talk about it today. Like everything today is very choreographed and very television and very whatever. And this was just great professional wrestling, and it was fast paced and it was exciting, and it was like you hated the heels. You wanted the dastardly Jim Cornette to get popped off the apron. You want Bobby to get pinned, but when you want to Rock and Roll to hit that double drop kick and get the win for whatever. And I mean it's just those matches are it's possible those are the greatest tag matches of all time.
Yeah, I do want to say that, and I do want to encourage all of the listeners, if anywhere you can find a recording of one of those matches that I during that time frame, I intend to go back and watch myself after this, and I hope all of you will do the same. Just to appreciate what Bobby and the others did that was so special, that entertained so many people, and really elevated, I would say, helped elevate tag team wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tag team wrestling was kind of, it was more or less, and I could be wrong, but people could correct me, but more or less it was kind of like a featured part of the show. It really wasn't the main event normally. Now there was like Mid-Atlantic, for instance. Mid-Atlantic was a tag team territory. Like they did a lot of main events over there. But this is the first time like in Mid-South and stuff like that the tag team was, not just featured but in the main event. You know what I mean? So that was groundbreaking for that too. And the Rock and Roll Express, still going strong today. They were actually just worked for us last night in Ripley, Tennessee. and I got to talk to Ricky and Robert. This is the first show, obviously, that they had or we had since Bobby passed, and it was just good to have them there last night to talk to them about Bobby and because they obviously they that was their brother, and they loved each other, so and they miss him just like I do, but they were I said some words last night in the ring, just about how my hero became my friend. You know what I mean? That's very rare in this business, and it's very true.
Well, yeah, and it and I certainly understand, and that I guess as sad as the situation is good timing that you had the opportunity to interact with those guys, because in there you're looking at two guys who spent untold hours and days, going up and down the roads all over the country, putting on shows with Bobby and Dennis and everyone. So because I know they wrestled, I know unknown number of times that they had such great chemistry that everybody ever wanted to have a chance to see that in their town and see these guys perform, and it made absolute sense.
Yeah, I mean, like there was a obviously the Rock and Roll versus Midnight feud in the '80s. There was a Midnight versus Rock and Roll feud in the '90s, and then in the early 2000s, there was a resurgence. Where a lot of people around the country, that nostalgia of the two greatest tag teams of all time. So they ran the gambit again. And sometimes they even did. I think they did triple threat, not triple threat, 6-man tag matches, and they have Stan and Dennis and Bobby and Cornette in the corner, obviously,
Sure.
against Rock and Roll and somebody.
Right.
So yeah, I just there's not enough I can say about Bobby Eaton as far as his abilities and the impact that Midnight Express had on tag team wrestling and wrestling in general.
And in that vein, along with Mid-South, they made their way to WCW.
Yeah.
And I suspect that's where a large part of the listening audience knows them from, starting with the Saturday, 6:05 show.
Yeah, on
and
the
all
Superstation.
And then, as wrestling kind of evolved into the pay-per-view era, Bobby was a part of that with that team and the Rock and Roll and all the things they did, and as a singles too, by the way. During his time at WCW, he did have a World Television Championship reign. I believe it was with Paul Heyman or Paul E. Dangerously at that time, I believe. Was it part of the Dangerous Alliance?
Well, yeah, he was that, but he was actually a TV champion before that.
Okay.
He had beat Arn as he was a babyface.
All right.
Bobby had beat Arn with the Alabama Jam. It's actually one of my favorite matches. I love that match. It's just two of my idols going at it, and they all were on that night for sure. If you guys can go back and watch, I think it was like Super Brawl maybe or Wrestle War maybe. It was somewhere in there. It was I think it was like '91. But anyway, yeah, Bobby. They went to NWA Superstation like you're talking about, and it was him and Dennis. And then Dennis, something happened where I guess Dennis just got to where he wanted to be home. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I think that was kind of his MO, was like he'd get burned out and he just want to go home to his ranch.
Well, it wouldn't be the first wrestler to say that. I mean,
right.
You've mentioned before that there was a point where Ricky Steamboat did that. And there have been untold numbers who've talked about the difficulty of traveling the road. I mean, well, let me just bring it forward to Brock Lesnar. Part of the reason why he made his way out of the WWE is because of the schedule and the kind of commitment it takes to do what Bobby did for so many years.
Yeah, exactly. And then, when Dennis went home, then they were left with that void of, well, what do we do? And, we're like, they got Stan in there, and the Midnight Express continued. And, like, I asked Cornette myself one time, I was like, okay, which one was the best version of the Midnight Express? And, of course, Jim Cornette, very political answer, was, for the spot that we had in Mid-South, he said, Bobby and Dennis were best because that main event, working 30 minutes a night, all that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. He said, but by the time we got to Bobby and Stan, we were in the television era, the
Right.
pay-per-view era, and having someone that looked like Stan in the team,
Exactly.
helped out tremendously. So, a very political answer, and there maybe there isn't a way to determine that.
Well,
but
that almost sounds like a question, which is your favorite child?
yeah.
Which version of that tag team? Because both tag teams had long, Bobby with Dennis and Bobby with Stan both had long, successful runs. Both accomplished a great deal, entertained a lot of people. And so, I will certainly understand Jim Cornette not. And to a degree, I can see what he's talking about. I can see how Stan's a little bit more television friendly, I guess, is the best way
absolutely.
to put it. And particularly, I don't know exactly how well they would have known him, but I suspect their paths crossed
In Memphis.
in Memphis long before.
Because he was one of the fabulous
You're
ones
right,
with
and,
Steve
and that's
Keirn.
what I was thinking. And I'm trying to be careful, make sure I have all my facts straight, because I'm going off the top of my head. But I thought, well, they would have interacted there and known each other, and so it would have been easier to bring someone in like that they were both familiar with and had worked with in some capacity in the past.
Yeah.
And so that transition, that team really became nationally and internationally famous, I believe. Fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the thing was, like, I don't know if you ever know this, but did you know Stan Lane was trained by Ric Flair?
I did not know that.
That's what they always put over on the telecast was the only man trained by Ric Flair.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And I don't know where that happened or how that happened, but maybe Flair just showed him a couple hip tosses one day, but
Well, it certainly makes a good story.
it makes a good story either way. But that was always kind of part of the legacy too. And then what happened in the early '90s was Ole and Cornette and I think Jim Hurd were all fucking button heads, and Cornette came up to him and said, "Okay, I'm leaving," talking to Bobby and Stan. And Stan goes, "Well, shit, I'll come with you," because Stan didn't want to wrestle anymore either. He had a lot of family money or something like that, and decided to get out of the business too. But Bobby's like, well, "Guys, I gotta work." You know what I mean? And they're like, "Yeah, whatever you need to do, just stay there." So that's when Bobby stayed there and had the singles run you were talking about. And like I said, that babyface run was really great to me. You know what I mean? Because he was just so good, and that's the way it happens with guys that are really good. If you're really good and you're a heel, then eventually the people start loving you because they understand that you're really good, right? And it kind of turns you babyface. So that babyface run he had was really good, and I really enjoyed it. He ended up actually losing the title to Stunning Steve Austin. And
yes, there's the name.
And Steve Austin actually puts Bobby Eaton over all the time because, and this goes back to Bobby being one of the nicest guys in professional wrestling. They brought Steve in from Texas, and out of nowhere they put the title on him like in the first couple months he was there. And Bobby could have balked or said, "No, I'm not putting the kid over," or whatever.
Well, yeah.
But Bobby didn't care. Bobby went out there, did business, and put him over clean as a whistle. And that's what started the ascension of Stunning Steve Austin in that era. Because if you remember, he was television champion, he was United States champion. He had this upward momentum with a lot of that.
Yeah, well, there we see the humility of Bob Eaton, and thinking long term. The ultimate goal is to entertain the audience and do what's best for business.
Well, just do business in general because, like I said, that was the era of I need to have a job.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So there was none of this. Well, if I don't get the world heavyweight title, I'm not coming back. Or it's just I would rather, and I've said this before, I would rather have a roster full of guys that could have been world champion and weren't than a roster full of guys that shouldn't have been and were. You know what I mean? Because to me, it diminishes the entire business.
And I suppose it's also fair to mention, as we mentioned, the Ragnar Express is they're most identified with. We should all mention they did wrestle all sorts of teams, and the Road Warriors would be a team that I don't want to overlook because they had interactions with them, obviously.
Right, yeah. I mean, there was all kind of stuff. And, like, when I asked Bobby about when the Road Warriors DVD came out. I don't know if you remember this or not.
Okay.
WWE put out the Road Warriors DVD, and like it really, in a way, was kind of a burial job of Hawk.
Okay.
You know, and he wasn't there to defend himself because he had
No.
passed away. You know,
Yeah.
but they talked a lot about the troubles they had with Hawk. He was moody, or whatever it may be. So it kind of upset me when I saw it, and I asked Bobby about it. I said, hey, is the stuff they're saying true? He's going, yeah, actually. He said, unfortunately,
Right.
because like he said that they'd work those guys and they had to work them 4 or 5 nights in a row, right?
Mhm.
Well, the first night the press lane would be fine, like complete extension, no
Right.
big deal.
Okay.
But after 2, 3, 4, 5 days of partying, by the time you got to that last day, they were dumping you on your head. You know what I mean?
Oh.
So it's
okay.
like stuff like that. So, it's always good to hear the kind of insight. Another insight that Bobby told me was me and him had a discussion about Lex Luger and Nikita Koloff. Now, like me looking at professional wrestling, and I'm pretty good at it, I think. Me looking at professional wrestling, to me it looked like Nikita was a more natural wrestler than Luger was, because Luger, he's kind of clunky
Yeah.
on some stuff, right?
Yeah.
When I said it to Bobby, he just kind of like, no. I was like, what do you mean?
Really?
I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, he was like, Nikita was a crowbar. He was stiff and he couldn't be moved around, and he was this. Luger was just light and there on everything. He said. I said, well, son of a bitch.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
it's one of those things like you don't. I tell people, guys, this all the time. You don't know someone until you actually lock up with them.
Okay.
You know what I mean? How they're gonna be. So.
Well, I certainly would have guessed much the same as you were laying out there. But ultimately, it's not about Luger, and I know we're closing in on time, but I suppose one of the things that it would be appropriate to talk about is his post WCW career. Obviously, we don't want to overlook the time that you all spent as a team. I think it's to let you talk about that if you would.
Yeah. So Bobby. Bobby was moving to Arkansas to start to live with Brian Thompson, and they were going to do where Bobby tagged up with a young guy in Arkansas and then tagged up with me in Tennessee, right?
Sure.
Well, the kid in Arkansas, somebody got in his ear or somebody told him it wasn't a good idea, whatever it may be, but he passed on it. Then all of a sudden, it was just, I was like, I'll do it. You know what I mean? I can I'm right, I'm close to Arkansas. I can jet over there.
Hey, there's a bridge.
There's a bridge, exactly. So I took that spot, and like I said, for 2 years, we were Midnight Gold. You know what I mean? And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life because that's when I really got to know Bobby. I'd actually wrestled Bobby on a Thanksgiving show probably about 6 years before we started teaming. We wrestled him, and like he loved me. He thought that I was really good, and he put me over that night. I mean, it was just amazing, right? And 6 years later, we started doing this tag thing, and we really got to know each other and really became friends. And he called me the captain of Midnight Gold. You know what I mean? And I put together probably 99% of our matches. And like every once in a while, he'd say, well, okay, why are we doing this? And I would explain why, or my thought process why, and he would go, okay. And that was it. He never balked on anything I ever asked for. And then there would be times where the promoters would go, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to pin Greg. And Bobby would go, no, we're not pinning Greg. Right? We're pinning me. You know what I mean? He took every pin that Midnight Gold ever took. He would never allow me to take a pin. You know what I mean? How many guys of his stature would do that? I've never heard of anyone else doing it, So, and that's, once again, another testament to the kind of guy he is.
Right, the humility he demonstrated over and over again, as you've mentioned on a couple of occasions. Because it's clear what he wanted to do was he wanted to help elevate another talent.
Yeah.
With the idea of having one in Arkansas and one in Tennessee as the original idea.
Yeah.
And that's what he was set out to do.
Yeah. And then the thing was, too, I was actually in his last official match. His last official match was a 6-man tag thing we did in Arkansas at a some kind of festival or fair or something like that over there, and like we were in the 6-man tag. So that's another thing I can hang my hat on, that I was in Bobby Eaton's last hoorah, you know. But you know, we don't want to overlook too. Like, you know, we talked about Bobby said he loved tag team wrestling just because he felt like he understood it more. You know what I mean? He said he really liked the four guys and coming up with new stuff and things of that nature. So, you know, you know, obviously we talked about his Midnight Express stuff and his single run, but you know, there was a time when him and William Regal were a tag team as the Blue Bloods, and me and Bobby actually did some of their spots because he really like he noticed I had a good European uppercut. Like he's like, oh yeah, him and Regal used to do the spot where a guy would duck Bobby's elbow, and then I'd be right there to
Catch him with the
catch him with the Europe, and he loved doing that spot. You know what I mean? And then of course there was another tag team he was a part of. It was Bad Attitude. It was actually him and Steve Kern.
Ah.
Very short-lived tag team in WCW that really did. You know, that was during when the NWO was fixing to start getting going.
Okay.
It was 95,
Yeah.
96, somewhere in there. And, like, it never caught on like it should, or it was never pushed like it should have been, because it really could have been good, because I watched some of their matches together, and while they weren't Dennis and Bobby or Stan and Bobby, it was still, you know, they were still great workers, both of them. So, I mean, it was still good stuff.
Well, you're talking about guys that are tag team and that are familiar with tag teams and being successful as tag teams. And really, this is where I get to get in a little promotion. I remain a big proponent of tag team wrestling. I love it. I think it's not as appreciated as it should be, because not everyone, and particularly those that are an audience of one, necessarily view tag team wrestling the way I do. And I understand that. But Bobby, and really, what I was happy to have the opportunity to talk about him during this podcast is you've mentioned some things that his humility, he's known as a tag team wrestler, and willingness to give other people the spotlight and all those things, and even in promos, stepping back. All those things were for the betterment of business, but they kind of let him go under the radar for your run-of-the-mill wrestling fan. A lot of people may not have known and appreciated what he did and the influence he had and the impact he had, and because he was relatively quiet on the microphone.
He was a relatively quiet guy in general. I mean, once you got him in a car and was traveling with him, obviously he would talk and stuff like that. For the most part, though, he would just sit back and relax.
Right.
You know, we'd stay at a hotel and something like that, and Bobby would tell me to take the bed because he wanted to sleep in the floor. Because he didn't sleep 8 hours straight. He would sleep like an hour and then wake up, and then he would sleep, you know, he was there for 2 hours and he'd sleep an hour. He was just, that was the way he lived. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know why it was like that, but that's the way it was for him. So he just, you take the bed, and he said he liked sleeping on the floor. So, I mean, just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
You know, main event guy, one of the biggest names, in my opinion, you know, and in wrestling, and he's sleeping on a hotel room floor. You know, while the manager, Brian Thompson, and his, you know, 26-year-old tag partner or whatever is in the bed. You know what I mean? But that was just Bobby. I mean, he literally... I need to tell one more story before we get out of here. But, so, one of my buddies in Maryland, right? He was on a show with Bobby up there, right? And he's fixing to go out. And he can't find his T-shirt that he normally wears to the ring. So his music's playing, and he's looking around, and Bobby says, "What are you looking for?" He goes, "I'm looking for my shirt." So Bobby starts helping him look for his shirt, right? Well, the guy finally says, never mind, I'll go without it. So he goes to the ring, does his match, 20-minute match, whatever it was. Comes to the back, Bobby Eaton is still looking for his shirt. You know what I mean? To me, that is like the quintessential Bobby Eaton story. You know what I mean? He didn't know this guy from Adam. You know what I mean? But he was still spent 20 minutes looking for his shirt. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the way he was. He literally cared and respected and loved everybody.
So ultimately, a man in a business known for flamboyant characters, really was a quiet man who had a tremendous, legendary career.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, with that, for myself, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and my co host, Midnight Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.